Okay, this set of videos is going to explore how we get to this final product, which is a small wooden trinket box. Your teacher has probably just talked to you about your design brief, set you your little problem, and this probably is part of a homework. What you should be doing is taking note of the tools and processes involved in the manufacture of this. It all starts with a piece of pine, which looks like this. Now this piece of softwood, you are going to separate off into 4 bits, in 2 pairs that are 55 and 2 pairs that are 75 millimeters in length. The tools required are first of all one of these, which is called a ruler, ideally one that's marked out in millimeters as opposed to centimeters, because obviously you're looking for that 55 and 75. 55 is 5.5 and 75 is 7.5 centimeters. I'm going to lay the ruler on my piece of material first of all and start to mark out at 55, and I'm going to put a line, and then rather unusually I'm going to set a 5mm gap between those 2 points before moving on to my next 55 and then leaving 5mm gap. Now the point of that 5mm gap, which will be easier seen on my next piece of material, is that you're going to want to put a saw blade in between those 2 lines. To get my line right across my material, because at this stage I've just got dots, I shall be using one of these, which is called a tri-square. Now the tri-square will guarantee you a 90-degree line from the edge of your material, and you've got quite a lot of these to go along. It's important as you use this to make sure that the stock, which is this brass strip here, is tight up against the edge of your material, and you can see that that's a good 90 degrees there. So I'm going to take that up to my first dot and draw a line, and then move up and draw another line. You'll be able to see my 5mm gap here now, and so on, all the way along the piece of material. Your piece of wood should look like this once it's marked out. So you've got all of your lines, and you can see the 2 55s with 5mm gaps between it, and then the 75s. As I said a moment ago, when you saw this, you'll be putting your saw between those 2 lines. That will guarantee then that you end up with a line to work to at the end. Right, let's look at cutting that now. You'll notice in my hands that I've got this tenon saw. This tenon saw is what we're going to be using to cut our material. And we're also going to be using one of these, which is called a bench hook. Now the bench hook allows us to cut on the table without actually cutting the table, but it also can be used to hold our material. So if I open up my wood vise here, and I put in the block, and then tighten it back up, you'll see that I'm ready to be able to cut on this. Now this bench hook that I've chosen is an ambidextrous one and can be used either by a right-handed or left-handed person. You need to look at the bench hook that you get to establish which handed it is. Usually by turning it over you can change that. So now I'm ready to cut. I'm going to put my piece of softwood against the end block of my bench hook, and I'm going to set my 55mm line up first, and you'll notice that I'm positioning the gap just at the end of this block so that when I take my tenon saw I can use that block as a guide. Now to start cutting I'm going to tip my tenon saw forward slightly, and I'm going to run it forward a couple of times just to create a little groove. Now that will stop the saw skating about as you start to bring that back and build up more of a sawing rhythm on that. So here we go. I'm now going to start to level that saw out and build up that nice rhythm back and forward. Okay, until you've cut that piece of material off. Now you should be able to see that there's a line still on that, which means that we can then sand back to that and ensure that we've got our 55. It's really important that we're accurate. When you've cut all your pieces of material up, you're obviously going to have something that looks like that. 2 pairs of 75 and 2 of 55. We're going to sand back to the line now, but we're only going to sand back the 55 pair. You don't need to worry about sanding the 75s, so we can set them to one side. You also, as a bit of a tip, can use double-sided tape, as I have done with this pair of 55s, so that we can sand these in one go. By doing that, you can then guarantee that as a pair, they will match. So I've used just a strip of double-sided tape between these two pieces of wood so that they're held together temporarily. Okay, now I'm ready to go over to the sander and I'm going to sand these. Right, remembering to put on your goggles and wearing your apron, of course, you will then turn on the machine and sand back to your line. Don't forget, at the end of this, you should be able to see the line. Okay, that's my pair sanded, and you can see just faintly on the edges of this still the pencil marks. That means that it is definitely 55 long. Right, take these back to the bench now and we'll look at how these are then glued up into more of a box shape. So here we have the two pieces of wood now separated off, and I've had to pick off the double-sided tape, okay, because I don't want that left on. And I've got my 275 pieces as well. I'm going to glue up using a piece of hardboard in the top. Now this example box here that's been glued up already shows you that this piece of material in the top here, this piece of hardboard, has been glued in with the rough side facing up. If you look at that, one side is smooth and the other is rough. The reason for that is because when we pour the polyester resin in on top, as with this example here, it prefers to stick onto a rougher surface. So, the first thing I'm going to do is lay down a longer 75 length on the table with the groove facing up. I'm then going to take some PVA glue here. PVA wood glue stands for polyvinyl acetate, is an excellent wood adhesive and one we use regularly and one that's used in industry as well. I'm going to brush some PVA glue around the edge of my piece of hardboard, because that is the bit that's going to be pushed into our groove. The reason that that needs to be done fairly accurately and thoroughly is because this is the thing, this is the barrier that will stop the polyester resin leaking inside the box when you pour the resin in. That will become a little bit more obvious later. So having gone all the way around that now, I'm going to position that rough side up in my groove. I'm then going to take my 255 lengths, which are obviously going to go either side of that, like that, but it's important that there's some glue on these edges that are touching, okay? So I'm going to brush some wood glue onto the end there and put that on there like that. And then I'm going to brush some more wood glue onto this end and put that on like that, which just leaves me to cover those top two edges like that and like that, so that I can put the final 75 length on top, and suddenly it's starting to look like a box. Right, one of the common problems at this point, before we clamp it, is that these sides here can wander in and obviously not be at 90 degrees. So it's important that you check that, and we can use the tri-square for that, and check that that's at 90 by parking the tri-square up against it. If you can see daylight through it, then it's not right. So that's about right now. And I'm going to do the same on the other side, and that's also about right now. So I can take my clamp. Here I'm using this G-clamp, or quick clamp, but you can put it in the wood vise. If you put it in the wood vise, you just need to be careful that there isn't any glue on these faces, because you'll end up gluing it to the wood vise and it'll be very difficult to get out. So I'm using this clamp, and I'm just going to clamp that up like that. Now that's about as far as we can get on this video, because we have to wait for that glue to go rock hard, and that takes usually 24 hours. So in a lesson, you'd be looking at an alternative activity once you'd got to this point. Okay.